Have you noticed something unusual lately? Not something loud, not something impossible, but something quietly repeating. The same question returning to your mind. The same opportunity slipping away, just when it seemed within reach. A delay you couldn't explain. A door that closed without warning. Or that strange feeling that life is trying to tell you something, but you can't quite put it into words. Most people dismiss these moments as coincidence. They move on, they scroll, they forget. But what if slowing down for a moment changed the way you saw everything? Stay with me, because before this message is over, I want to invite you to look at your own life from a different perspective. One that has encouraged countless believers through seasons of uncertainty. Think back to the last time you prayed with complete honesty. Not the polished words, not the routine prayer, the one whispered in the middle of the night when no one else knew what was weighing on your heart. Maybe you asked for direction. Maybe you asked for strength. Maybe you simply asked, Lord, what am I supposed to do now? For many people, the hardest part isn't praying. It's waiting. Waiting without answers, waiting without visible progress, waiting while everyone else seems to move ahead. That waiting can feel lonely. It can make you wonder whether you've been forgotten. Yet throughout Scripture, seasons of waiting often became the very place where faith grew the deepest. Sometimes the silence isn't empty. Sometimes it creates the space where we begin to notice what constant noise has been hiding. Have you ever noticed how quickly we expect answers? We want every closed door explained immediately, every disappointment to make sense today, every prayer answered on our schedule. But life rarely unfolds that way. Looking back, many people discover that the very moment they once called a setback became the turning point that prepared them for something they couldn't yet see. That's difficult to believe while you're living through it, but it's often easier to recognize afterward. Maybe that's where you are today, standing between what was and what comes next, feeling uncertain, wondering whether you're moving in the right direction. If so, you're not alone. Many faithful people have stood in that same place, not because they lacked faith, but because growth often happens before clarity. So instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Try asking, what can I learn while I'm here? That one question has the power to change the way you experience the entire season. Because sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't begin when your circumstances change. It begins when your perspective changes. And perspective is often built one quiet decision at a time. One prayer, one act of patience, one step of faith. One choice to keep trusting even when the outcome isn't visible yet. If this message has already connected with something you've been feeling, don't rush past that feeling. Sit with it for a moment. Reflect on it. Ask yourself what areas of your life have been demanding immediate answers when perhaps what you truly need is steady faith. There's a difference. Immediate answers satisfy curiosity. Steady faith changes character. And character has a way of preparing us for responsibilities we couldn't carry before. As you continue watching, I want you to keep one simple question in your mind. What if this season is shaping me more than I realize? Don't answer it yet. Just carry that question with you. Because in the next part, we'll explore how ordinary moments most people overlook, can become invitations to deeper wisdom, renewed hope, and a stronger trust in God's guidance. And sometimes, the smallest moment you almost ignored becomes the one you remember for the rest of your life. Have you ever noticed that the moments we fear the most are often the moments that teach us the most? Not because they are easy, not because they feel good, but because they force us to slow down long enough to ask questions we would never ask when life is comfortable. Think about it. When everything is going exactly as planned, most of us rarely stop to reflect. We simply move from one goal to the next, one achievement to another, one distraction after another. But when life suddenly becomes quiet, when the answers don't come, when another opportunity slips away, that's when something begins to change inside us. Maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you've been asking the same question over and over. Lord, what am I supposed to learn from this? That's not a sign of weak faith. Sometimes it's the beginning of deeper faith. Because faith isn't only believing when everything makes sense. Faith is choosing to trust even when you don't have every answer. And that kind of trust doesn't grow overnight. It grows through ordinary days, ordinary prayers, ordinary decisions, one faithful step at a time. Take a moment and think back over the past year. Can you remember something that disappointed you at first, but later became one of the greatest lessons of your life? Many of us can. Looking backward often reveals what we couldn't see moving forward. That's why it's dangerous to judge the entire story from a single chapter. Your current season is not the whole story. It's only one page, one paragraph, one moment. If this message resonates with you, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back and realized that a closed door actually protected you? If so, share your experience in the comments. Someone reading your story today may find hope because of what you've learned. Sometimes, encouragement comes from hearing that someone else walked through uncertainty and came out stronger on the other side. Now here's another thought. We often ask God to remove every obstacle. But what if some obstacles are invitations to grow in patience, to grow in wisdom, to become the kind of person who can carry the blessing we're praying for? That's not always the answer, but it's a question worth reflecting on. The Bible is filled with people whose lives changed not in an instant, but through faithful perseverance. They didn't always understand the journey while they were living it, yet they continued to trust. Maybe your next step isn't to have every answer. Maybe your next step is simply to keep walking faithfully today, not tomorrow, not next year, today. And if that's the choice you're making, right, I will keep trusting in the comments. Not because those words change your circumstances by themselves, but because sometimes putting hope into words reminds our hearts of the direction we want to follow. As we continue, there's one more question that deserves your attention. What if the thing you've been calling a delay is actually giving you time to become the person you're meant to be? Don't answer too quickly. Now, let's stay with that question for just a little longer. What if this season isn't delaying your purpose, but developing it? Most people never ask that question. They only ask, when will this finally be over? And honestly, that's understandable. No one enjoys uncertainty. No one wakes up hoping for another difficult day. No one asks for unanswered prayers or unexpected disappointments. Yet some of the greatest transformations in life begin in seasons that feel ordinary to confusing or even frustrating. Have you ever planted a seed? The moment you place it into the ground, nothing seems to happen. The surface looks exactly the same. Days pass, sometimes weeks. If someone didn't know what was happening beneath the soil, they might believe nothing was growing at all, but hidden beneath the surface, roots are quietly forming. Strength is developing before anything becomes visible. Our lives often work the same way. The most important growth is usually the part nobody else can see. Your patience, your character, your compassion, your willingness to keep moving forward even when the path ahead isn't completely clear. Those things don't always receive applause, but they shape who you become, and who you become often matters even more than what you achieve. Take a deep breath for a moment and think about the challenges you've already overcome. Years ago, there were situations you thought would break. You'd got moments you believed you would never recover from, yet here you are, still standing, still searching, still hoping. That doesn't mean life has been easy. It means you've already survived more than you sometimes give yourself credit for. Maybe that's worth remembering today, because when we focus only on what's missing, we often forget how far we've already come. Gratitude doesn't erase pain, but it reminds us that pain isn't the entire story. Here's something I've noticed. The people who inspire others the most are rarely the people who had perfect lives. They're usually the people who learned how to keep going when life became difficult, not because they were fearless, but because they refused to let fear make every decision. That kind of courage grows quietly, one choice at a time, one prayer at a time, one day at a time. Let me ask you something. Has there ever been a moment when you almost gave up? but you're thankful today that you didn't? If that's part of your story, share it in the comments. Your experience could become the encouragement someone else needs today. Sometimes the words of an ordinary person carry extraordinary hope. Now imagine this: you're walking through a dense forest. You can't see the end of the path. Every tree blocks your view. It feels like you're walking in circles, but someone looking from the top of the mountain can see the entire trail. They know exactly where it leads. Your view is limited. The bigger picture isn't. That's why uncertainty doesn't always mean you're lost. Sometimes it simply means you don't yet have the full picture, and that's okay. We all experience seasons where we don't understand everything. History is full of ordinary people whose consistent faithfulness mattered more than dramatic moments. Maybe your story is being written in the same quiet way, not with loud headlines, not with instant success, but with steady growth that becomes visible only after enough time has passed. And perhaps that's the hardest lesson of all. Growth often feels slow while we're living it. Only later do we realize how much we've changed. So before you rush into tomorrow, pause for a moment today, reflect, pray, listen. Not because you'll suddenly have every answer, but because peace often begins long before certainty does. And in the next part, we're going to explore why some of the most meaningful changes in life begin the moment we stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How can I grow through this?" That single shift in perspective has changed countless lives, and it might change the way you see your own story too. Now hold on to that thought for just a little longer. What if the greatest change in your life doesn't begin the day your circumstances change, but the day your perspective changes? Most people spend years waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity, the perfect breakthrough, the perfect answer. But what if the real breakthrough begins long before any of those things arrive? Imagine standing in front of a beautiful stained glass window. If you're standing too close, all you see are scattered pieces of colored glass. Red, blue, gold, green. Nothing seems connected, nothing seems meaningful. But when you step back, every piece becomes part of a larger picture. Life often feels the same way. When we're living through difficult moments, we only see the broken pieces. We don't yet see how they fit together. That doesn't make the pieces meaningless. It simply means the picture isn't finished. Maybe you've been carrying questions that have remained unanswered for months. Maybe you've wondered why certain relationships changed, why certain plans never worked out, why the path you expected suddenly disappeared. Those questions are real, and they're not signs of failure. They're signs that you're human. Every person who has ever walked by faith has experienced moments of uncertainty. The difference isn't that some people never struggle. The difference is that they don't allow uncertainty to become the final chapter of their story. Instead, they keep walking, one faithful step, then another, and another. Without realizing it, every step changes them. Not because the road becomes easier, but because they become stronger. Think about a sculptor shaping a block of marble. Every strike of the chisel removes something. If the stone could speak, it might believe it was only losing pieces of itself. It wouldn't understand that every careful strike is revealing something beautiful that was hidden inside all along. Life sometimes feels like that. There are seasons when it seems as though things are being taken away. Comfort, control, certainty. But perhaps those moments are also revealing strengths you never knew you possessed, patience you never thought you could have, compassion that only grew because you experienced hardship, wisdom that could never have been learned from comfort alone. Take a moment and ask yourself, which challenge in your life has quietly made you stronger, not louder, not more successful, stronger? If one comes to mind, share it in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. Sometimes the greatest encouragement doesn't come from people who avoided hardship. It comes from people who walked through it and refused to lose hope. Here's another thought. Many of us spend so much time asking, when will my life finally change? That we forget to notice how much we've already changed. The person you were 5 years ago isn't the person reading these words today. You've learned, you've grown, you've survived things that once seemed impossible. You've become wiser through experience. And although the journey may still feel unfinished doesn't mean unsuccessful. Growth is rarely dramatic. It's usually quiet, steady, almost invisible. Until one day you look back and realize you've become someone your past self would hardly recognize. That's the power of small, faithful choices. They don't always create immediate results, but over time they shape an entirely different future. As you continue listening, don't focus only on where you wish you were. Also remember where you've already been. Sometimes gratitude gives us the strength to keep moving forward. Not because everything is perfect, but because we begin to see that every season, even the difficult ones, can teach us something valuable. And here's a question I want you to carry into the next part. If your current season is preparing you for something greater, what kind of person is it helping you become today? Don't rush past that question. Sit with it. Reflect on it. If you've stayed with me this far, I want you to pause for just a moment, not to search for an answer, but to notice something you may have overlooked. Think about the person you were before this difficult season began. Now think about the person you're becoming. The distance between those two versions of yourself may be greater than you realize. Growth has a quiet way of happening. It rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with applause or celebration. More often it grows in the ordinary moments, when you choose patience instead of frustration, kindness instead of resentment, and hope instead of giving up. Those moments may seem small, but over time, small decisions shape extraordinary lives. Imagine a blacksmith forging a piece of steel. The metal is placed into intense heat, then it's struck again and again. If the steel could speak, it might wonder why it must endure such pressure. Yet the craftsman sees something the steel cannot. He isn't trying to destroy it. He's shaping it for a purpose. Life can feel similar. There are seasons when pressure seems to come from every direction. Unexpected responsibilities, disappointments, long periods of waiting, questions that don't have immediate answers. While those moments can feel overwhelming, they also reveal qualities that comfort alone could never develop. Perseverance, humility, compassion, resilience. These are not qualities we usually ask for, yet they often become the qualities we value the most. Now think about someone you've always admired. Chances are, it wasn't because they lived a perfect life. It was because they kept going when life became difficult. Their strength wasn't built in a single day. It was built one decision at a time, one act of faithfulness, one choice to keep moving forward. Your journey is no different. You don't have to see the entire road ahead. Sometimes the next faithful step is enough. That step may not feel dramatic. It may simply be choosing to encourage someone else when you're discouraged yourself. It may be choosing gratitude even when circumstances are still uncertain, or deciding to hold on to hope even when you can't yet see the outcome. Those choices matter more than you realize, because every decision you make today becomes part of the person you'll be tomorrow. Here's something worth remembering. Many people confuse silence with absence, but silence doesn't always mean nothing is happening. Think of the sunrise. Long before the first rays appear above the horizon, the world is already changing. The darkness doesn't disappear all at once. Light slowly begins to break through. In much the same way, meaningful change in our lives often begins quietly. We may not notice it at first, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. If you've ever looked back on your life and realized that something difficult eventually taught you wisdom you couldn't have learned any other way, take a moment to share that experience in the comments. Your story could remind someone else that difficult seasons do not last forever, and sometimes hope grows stronger when it's shared. Now ask yourself another question. What if you've been measuring progress the wrong way? What if progress isn't only about reaching a destination? What if progress is also about becoming more patient, more compassionate, more courageous, more willing to trust, even when the future remains uncertain? Those kinds of victories are easy to overlook, yet they often become the foundation for everything that follows. There is an old saying that strong trees grow slowly. The ones that survive the fiercest storms usually spent years developing deep roots before anyone noticed their height. People often admire the branches, few ever think about the roots. Your character is like those roots. It's being built beneath the surface. Others may not see it yet. You may not even recognize it yourself. But one day, when life brings another challenge, you'll discover a strength you didn't realize had been growing all along. And when that day comes, you'll understand that every season, even the confusing ones, had value. Not because they were easy, but because they helped shape the person you were becoming. So don't underestimate today. Don't dismiss ordinary moments as unimportant. Every conversation, every quiet prayer, every decision to forgive, every act of kindness, every choice to keep moving forward despite uncertainty is adding another layer to your story. One day, you'll look back and realize that what seemed like an ordinary chapter was actually preparing you for an extraordinary future. Before we continue, I want to leave you with one final reflection. What quality is this season developing in you that comfort never could? Take a moment to think about it. If one word comes to mind, perhaps patience, faith, courage, or hope, share that single word in the comments. You may be surprised how many others are walking a similar path, because none of us walks this journey entirely alone. Take a quiet moment. Not to think about everything that still hasn't happened, not to replay every disappointment in your mind, but simply to remember this. Your story is still being written, and as long as the story is still being written, no difficult chapter has the authority to become the final one. Sometimes we become so focused on one painful season that we forget how many chapters are still ahead. It's like reading only the middle of a book and deciding you already know how it ends. None of us would do that with a novel, yet many of us do it with our own lives. We assume today's struggle defines tomorrow's future, but life has a remarkable way of surprising us, not always with instant answers, not always with dramatic changes, but often with quiet moments that slowly reshape everything. Think about the sunrise once more. No one flips a switch and suddenly turns darkness into daylight. Morning arrives little by little. The sky changes almost unnoticed. Color begins to replace shadow. Hope quietly replaces fear. The world doesn't transform in 1 second. It transforms one moment at a time. Perhaps your own life is unfolding the same way. Maybe the changes you've been praying for aren't arriving all at once, because lasting growth rarely happens that way. Lasting change is usually patient, steady, intentional, almost invisible, until one day you suddenly realize, I'm not the same person I used to be. That realization is powerful because it reminds us that transformation isn't measured only by what happens around us. It's also measured by what happens within us. Take a moment and think about someone who has deeply inspired your life. Was it their success that inspired you? Or was it the way they responded when life became difficult? Most people remember courage more than comfort. They remember kindness more than achievement. They remember integrity more than popularity. Those qualities don't appear overnight. They're developed through countless ordinary decisions that no one else ever sees. The world often celebrates the destination, but character is built during the journey, and perhaps that's one of the greatest lessons we can learn. Never underestimate quiet faithfulness. Never underestimate ordinary obedience. Never underestimate a heart that chooses hope even when circumstances remain uncertain. Those quiet choices may seem invisible today, but over time, they become the strongest foundation a person can build. Imagine constructing a lighthouse beside the sea. The strongest part isn't the light everyone admires from a distance. It's the foundation buried deep beneath the rocks. Without that foundation, the first great storm would bring everything down. People admire what shines, but what keeps it standing is what no one notices. Our lives are often the same. The habits we build in private, the prayers whispered when no one else is listening, the moments we choose forgiveness instead of bitterness, the quiet acts of compassion that no camera ever records. Those are the foundations that prepare us for whatever lies ahead. If you've ever experienced a season that quietly made you stronger than you realized, tell us about it in the comments. Your story could become the encouragement someone else has been searching for today. Sometimes the most powerful reminders don't come from famous voices. They come from ordinary people who simply refuse to stop believing that tomorrow could be better than today. Now let me ask you another question. How often do we overlook today's blessings because we're completely focused on tomorrow's answers? It's a challenge many of us face. We become so determined to reach the next destination that we forget to appreciate the progress we've already made. Yet gratitude has a unique way of changing perspective. It doesn't deny pain. It simply refuses to let pain become the only thing we notice. Gratitude reminds us that even during difficult seasons, there are still reasons to hope. A kind word, a faithful friend, a new opportunity, a lesson learned, a moment of peace. These things may appear small, but small blessings often become the threads that weave together a life filled with purpose. And perhaps that's why the most meaningful lives aren't always the loudest. They're often the quietest, built through consistency, built through humility, built through countless small decisions that point toward hope instead of fear. As you continue your own journey, remember this. You don't have to understand every step before taking the next one. You don't have to know every answer before moving forward. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is simply choosing not to quit, choosing to remain kind, choosing to remain patient, choosing to remain faithful. One ordinary day at a time, and one day. Without even realizing when it happened, you'll look back and discover that the person who once questioned every step has become someone capable of guiding others through their own difficult seasons. That is how hope multiplies. Not through perfection, but through perseverance, not through certainty, but through trust, not through having every answer, but through continuing the journey anyway. So before we move into the final chapter, I want to leave you with one last question to carry in your heart. If someone looked at the way you're walking through this season today, what kind of hope would they see? Think about that, because the answer to that question may become one of the most meaningful parts of your story. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want to ask you one final question. What if one day you looked back on this season, not with regret, not with disappointment, but with gratitude? At first, that question may seem difficult to answer, because when you're living through uncertainty, gratitude doesn't always come naturally. But time has a remarkable way of revealing what we couldn't understand in the moment. Think about the pages we've walked through together, the unanswered questions, the unexpected delays, the closed doors, the quiet moments that felt confusing. None of those experiences were pleasant, yet every one of them had the potential to shape something valuable within you. Not because hardship is good in itself, but because growth often begins where comfort ends. Imagine climbing a mountain before sunrise. The path is dark, the air is cold, every step feels uncertain. You can't yet see the view waiting at the top. There are moments when turning back seems easier than moving forward. But those who continue walking eventually discover something incredible. The sunrise was always coming. It simply arrived at the right time. Life often feels like that climb. We don't always know how close we are to a new beginning. Sometimes we're only a few more faithful steps away, yet we convince ourselves that nothing will ever change. That's why hope matters. Hope reminds us that today's chapter doesn't have to determine tomorrow's ending. Take a moment and think about your own story, not just the painful moments. Remember the victories too, the prayers that were answered, the friendships that encouraged you, the lessons that made you wiser, the strength you discovered when you thought you had none left. Those moments deserve your attention just as much as the difficult ones, because they remind you that your life has never been defined by one single season. It has been shaped by many seasons, each one adding something unique, each one teaching something valuable. Perhaps that's the message you've needed all along. Not that every question will be answered immediately, not that every obstacle will disappear overnight, but that you can continue walking with courage, wisdom, and hope, even while some questions remain unanswered. That kind of faith doesn't ignore reality. It faces reality honestly while refusing to surrender hope. And maybe that's one of the greatest victories any of us can experience. To become the kind of person who remains compassionate after disappointment, who remains humble after success, who remains grateful even during uncertainty, and who continues choosing kindness in a world that often rewards the opposite. Those choices matter, far more than we realize, because people may forget our achievements, they may forget our titles, they may even forget our words, but they rarely forget how we made them feel. A life marked by compassion leaves an influence that reaches far beyond one moment. Before we finish, I'd like to invite you to pause for just a few seconds. Take a deep breath. Think of one thing you're grateful for today. It doesn't have to be something extraordinary. Perhaps it's another morning, another opportunity, a loved one, a lesson learned, or simply the strength to keep moving forward. Gratitude has a quiet way of changing the direction of our hearts. And when our hearts change, the way we see the world begins to change as well. If this message encouraged you, I'd love to hear from you. Share one word in the comments that describes what you're holding on to today. Maybe it's faith, maybe it's hope, maybe it's peace, or maybe it's courage. Your one word might become the encouragement someone else needed to read today. And if this reflection has brought comfort or strength to your heart, consider sharing it with someone who may be walking through a difficult season. Sometimes one thoughtful conversation, one encouraging message, or one act of kindness can become the turning point in another person's day. As we say goodbye, remember this. You don't have to have every answer before taking the next step. You don't have to understand every chapter before trusting that the story is still unfolding. Life is not measured only by the destinations we reach. It is also measured by the character we build, the hope we keep, and the love we choose to share along the way. So wherever you are today, whether you're celebrating, waiting, healing, or simply trying to move forward one day at a time, don't lose sight of this truth. Every sunrise begins with a night that eventually gives way to light. Every meaningful journey, big